Hugh Keenan was a sailor on the USS Consolation, which was a medical ship in Korea, 1953. And after so many years of bloodshed, an armistice was being negotiated. So there was a stillness, and they waited. They waited and they waited as the politicians worked out this armistice. And Hugh, like so many of the other sailors on board now, with little to do, was very homesick for his wife and daughter, family and friends. And someone suggested to him that the captain and one of the lieutenants was going over to make a visit to the local orphanage run by some Catholic nuns there in Korea, and maybe that would brighten his spirits. So he went along with them. As they visited the orphanage, he noticed there was one boy who was biracial. He was apparently Korean American. And he realized that he may not have much of a chance to be adopted. So Keenan spoke to his officer about the possibility of the ship adopting this child. Well, that would be complicated, all kinds of red tape and so on and so forth, but he convinced the captain, and they asked the sisters, and the sisters said, well, while we're waiting on getting through negotiations, you can take him on board. So imagine the morale of all those sailors on this medical ship when they have a little baby that they're going to try and adopt. Everything started to look rosy. They were so excited. Everybody volunteered to rock the baby. Everybody was interested. They were even taking the diapers and taking them up on the flag line, and it must have been quite a scene. Very confusing to those who didn't know what was going on. Well, as they tried to negotiate, sort of like the armistice, they found every roadblock very, very difficult to do this, making it look impossible. So the chaplain on board, a priest named Father Riley, decided to take things in his own hands. He contacted one of the local government officials who was working on passports and adoptions and so forth, and he said, I challenge you to a game of poker. You bring a passport for this baby, and I'm going to put up $200. And the ship's doctor said he was going to put his gold watch in. And whoever wins gets everything. So, sure enough, one of the officials couldn't resist a good poker game. And he came, he had the passport, all the sailors on board were praying for Father Riley, and thanks be to God, he won that game. And that baby was adopted by sailor Hugh Keenan. Many years later, there was a reunion of the sailors from that ship, and of course they got to see this fine young man, now an adult. Oh, what a difference a baby makes. That baby brought up the whole spirit on board that ship. New life, new hope, and people working together for a common good of a new life. Today, on the Feast of the Holy Family, we recognize one baby that made all the difference for the entire world. A baby that was received by Joseph and Mary in not a warm home, but a cold stable. A baby who would then be honored by shepherds and then taken to be presented in the temple, as we heard in the gospel today, with prophecies of blood, of sorrows, and then not long thereafter having to flee, becoming refugees in Egypt, a land where their ancestors had been slaves. Oh, what a mysterious journey this baby had. Joseph and Mary would never have planned that kind of a life for their baby, would they? Nobody would want to be a refugee. You don't want to be a refugee. It's something that happens, and so it was that they found themselves in Egypt, eventually making their way back to their home in Nazareth. What did Jesus do for those 30 years? Jesus learned hard labor as a carpenter, working steadily, working faithfully. Here he is. He created the whole universe as the eternal God, his divine person being the second person of the Blessed Trinity, and yet he humbly takes on human labor with the creativity of a carver with wood. And then, and only after those years, did he begin a public ministry to save the world. Today, as we look at the Holy Family and wonder what it must have been like raising this child, some say, well, we've got to have a Holy Family spirit in every home. And one dad said, wait a minute. Joseph was a saint. His wife was sinless, and the son was God. That's not the circumstance in my house. Okay, granted, you're right. However, we must invite the Holy Family into our homes and develop the kind of virtues that St. Paul spoke to us about in the second reading today from the letter of the Colossians, chapter 3. Because you too are chosen ones, St. Paul tells us. You are to be holy. You are beloved. Therefore, clothe yourselves with, here's the virtues, heartfelt mercy, with kindness, humility, meekness, and patience. Will you then, with these virtues, have an easy life? Not at all. God doesn't promise an easy life. The Holy Family didn't have an easy life, as I recounted. Persecuted in Bethlehem, refugeeing in Egypt, being misunderstood in his hometown of Nazareth. However, here Paul then continues with a few more virtues that we need to deal with those challenges. He continues by saying, forgive as the Lord has forgiven you. Over all these virtues, put on love, which binds the rest together and makes them perfect. Christ's peace must reign in your hearts. Isn't this what we need in our homes? Isn't this what we need in our families? And it takes tough love to develop these kinds of virtues. It takes parenting. And that's not easy, as you well know. One doctor, I was reading his article about the effect he's seen in the electronic age of families coming into his office and the disrespect. When you're seeing the doctor, kids playing with electronics, and the kid's the patient. He says, no. Parents have to be strict about these. You have to put boundaries. And this doctor, when it comes to mealtime, has the kids put all the electronics in a basket and puts the basket aside, and they sit down and they talk and they listen as a family. We've got to recapture that. The doctor's right. He's been practicing as a pediatrician for decades, and he's seen this decline. And we've got to stand up to the tidal wave by doing something seriously about it. Long ago at the Second Vatican Council, the Council Fathers wrote this about family in Gaudium et Spes. The family in which the various generations come together and help one another grow wiser and harmonize personal rights with the other requirements of social life is the very foundation of society. Let the spouses themselves, made to the image of the living God and enjoying the authentic dignity of persons, be joined to one another in equal affection, harmony of mind, and the work of mutual sanctification. Thus, following Christ, who is the principle of life, by the sacrifices and joys of their vocation, and through their faithful love, married people can become witnesses of the mystery of love which the Lord revealed to the world. You notice that the Council speaks of marriage as a vocation. It is a calling. It is a sacrament and a vocation. And we must elevate the dignity of that holy vocation. Pope John Paul, who wrote about marriage on many occasions, wrote this: the only place in which self-giving in its whole truth is made possible is marriage. The covenant of conjugal love freely and consciously chosen, whereby man and woman accept the intimate community of life and love willed by God Himself. The beauty of this self-giving, this sacrificial love, John Paul says, is seen in this sacrament of matrimony. So we have much to pray for on the Feast of the Holy Family, that our families can be renewed in their marriage covenant. I think you may remember this story happened in the age of knights and chivalry in Weinsberg, Germany. The castle was surrounded by the enemy, and the siege had gone so long that they had to give up. So in the negotiations, they were able to get the head of the army, the enemy army, to allow them, for the women and the children, to leave in these negotiations before the men would surrender. And further negotiations, they were able to get this knight in shining armor to agree that these women would be allowed to take one precious item with them, just one, on their backs. And so they then let down the gate, and over the moat from the castle, they see the women coming out, one after another, with their husbands on their backs. Gentlemen, be good to your wife. Their most precious possession. And so, I conclude now with a prayer to the Holy Family for us all. O Jesus, our most loving Redeemer, who having come to enlighten the world with your teaching and example, did will to pass the greater part of your life in humility and subjection to Mary and Joseph in the poor home of Nazareth, thus sanctifying the family that was to be an example for all Christian families. Graciously bless and receive our families as we dedicate and consecrate ourselves to you this day. Grant us an increase in the virtues of humility, obedience, modesty, patience, gentleness, and charity, so needed in family life. Defend us, guard us, and establish us in true peace and Christian love, in order that by conforming ourselves to the divine pattern of your family, we may be able to attain to eternal happiness forever and ever. Amen.